My name is Helen, and at 30 years old, the rain came down in thin needles that blurred the glass of my apartment window. It was barely past 7, too early for anyone to be pounding on a door. But there they were, my mother, my sister Clara, Ethan, and the kids. Suitcases lined up on the steps like they'd been dropped off by a cab, pajamas under jackets, tired faces, and not a single call the night before to ask if it was all right. I stayed still, breath held, watching from the upstairs landing. My stomach tightened, the way it always did when I sensed a storm brewing. But this time, I wasn't moving toward the door. I wasn't opening it. Then I saw her reach for her phone. For a second, I thought she was about to call me, unleash the lecture directly into my ear. Instead, my phone lit up with my father's name. She wasn't calling me at all. She was calling him. Through the crack of the curtain, I watched her pacing, voice raised to carry over the drizzle. "Honey, your crazy daughter won't let us in. We're stuck on the stairs with our stuff." Each word was meant for me. Even if she aimed them at him, I felt the heat rise to my face, a sting sharper than the rain. It wasn't enough that I'd said no. Now she wanted him to drag me back into yes. I could almost picture him sitting in his office chair with that quiet sigh, already deciding how to smooth things over without asking what it would cost me. The phone vibrated again in my hand. His name glowed against the screen as if I already knew what side he'd chosen. The buzzing in my hand pulled me back years in an instant. My father had always been the middleman, the voice that came after my mother's shouting. When I was a child, she set the rules and broke them when it suited her. He stood behind her, nodding, telling me, "It's not worth the fight." That was his mantra, peace at any cost, even if the cost was mine. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I remembered the night before prom when she decided I couldn't go because the house wasn't clean enough. I'd spent the week balancing homework and a part-time job at the cafe on Pike Street, and when I collapsed on the couch, she turned it into a verdict. My father drove me to school the next morning in silence, never once asking if I was okay, only muttering that I should let it go because upsetting her would ruin everything for everyone. College wasn't different. During finals at the University of Washington, she called me 3 times in 1 week to babysit Clara's kids. I said I couldn't, but then came Dad's voice on speaker. "She just needs you for a little while. You're good with them, and your mom's tired?" I went. I always went. And the grade I lost that semester never mattered to them. Now, standing in my own apartment with their shadows on my porch, I felt the familiar weight pressing down again. My mother's voice, sharp as glass, and my father soon to follow, softer, but no less binding. It was the same playbook they'd used my entire life, she demanded. He pressed, and I caved. The rain outside tapped steady against the windows, as if keeping time with my heartbeat. I stared at the phone in my palm, his name glowing like a command. My thumb hovered, knowing that answering would be the first step toward surrender. Instead, I slid the phone onto the counter and let it buzz itself quiet. The knock on the door grew louder, punctuated by Clara's voice trying to sound reasonable. I stood perfectly still, realizing that this time I didn't have to move at all. From the window, I watched my mother tilt her chin higher, her voice pitched just loud enough to drift across the street. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every word into her phone wasn't just for my father. It was for the neighbors walking their dogs, for anyone glancing out from their porches. "We're stuck here in the rain," she said, dragging the syllables like chains with the kids with all our bags, "and she won't open the door." A man with a red umbrella slowed near the sidewalk, pretending to check his watch, but really listening. My mother's performance had found an audience. Clara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, whispering to Ethan, who kept his eyes on the ground. The kids fidgeted, one tugging at Clara's sleeve, another sitting down on a suitcase. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my father. "What are you doing? Just let them in." I stared at the words until they blurred, my chest tightening. He hadn't been there 2 weeks ago, when I sent the message about needing space after the procedure. He hadn't been there when I begged for 1 month of quiet to heal, when I said I couldn't carry everyone else's weight while I was trying to stand on my own feet. Now he appeared not to ask how I was holding up, but to tell me to surrender. The unfairness sat heavy, sharper than the drizzle streaking the glass. My mother knew how to spin the story, and my father played along by choosing the simplest path, my compliance. Together, they made me the unreasonable one, the selfish daughter barricading herself against family. The voices outside rose again, each sentence a hook meant to reel me back into the old rhythm. I pressed my palm flat against the counter, grounding myself in the quiet of my kitchen. For once, I wasn't the one knocking. I wasn't the one explaining through the glass. I caught my mother glancing up at the window as if daring me to appear. Instead, I stepped back into the hallway, my pulse steady, waiting for her next move. Her voice outside blurred into background noise as another memory pulled me under. It was 5 years ago, a February night when pneumonia left me shivering under blankets, ribs aching with every shallow breath. I had been told not to leave my room, to rest, to avoid stress. But that night, music pounded through the walls, laughter spilled down the hallway, and the smell of pizza grease and cheap wine seeped beneath my door. I dragged myself out of bed, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and found the living room full of strangers. My mother stood in the center like a queen, a glass in her hand, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "It's just a few friends from work," she said, waving me off when I asked what was happening. My orchid had been shoved into a corner, couch cushions displaced to make room for a folding table covered in paper plates. And there was my father leaning near the fireplace, nodding politely to someone I didn't know. He saw me, saw the sweat on my forehead, the tremor in my hands, but his eyes slid away. Not one word, not even a glance that acknowledged the state I was in. He stayed quiet until the last guest left. And when I asked him later why he hadn't said anything, he just rubbed his temple. It wasn't worth the fight. That phrase had followed me like a shadow ever since. It wasn't worth the fight. When my mother screamed, when she lied, when she demanded more than I had to give, his silence kept her throne upright. Standing in my kitchen now, the voices outside pressing harder, I realized the betrayal had never been only hers. It was theirs. She spoke the words, but he carried them in silence, steady as stone. The weight of both pressed down until I felt my jaw tighten through the rain-streaked window. My mother gestured broadly, pulling Clara closer like a stagehand in her performance. I closed the curtain in one sharp motion, cutting off her theater. The kitchen fell still again, and for the first time that morning, I exhaled without shaking. The stillness held me, bracing me for what I knew would come next. The next afternoon, the rain had eased into mist when I heard a light knock on my back door. It wasn't my mother's pounding rhythm, but a careful tap. I opened it to find Ivy, my old friend from college, holding a paper bag of pastries. She lived 2 blocks away now, and though our paths only crossed occasionally, she still had the knack of showing up at the right moment. She stepped inside, setting the bag on the counter. "Your porch was a scene yesterday," she said gently. Half the neighborhood was whispering. I didn't answer. My silence must have told her enough because she went on lowering her voice. I saw something else, too. At Clara's place, new people moving in with a big SUV. Washington plates, beach chairs, coolers. Looked like they were setting up for the summer. I checked the listing later. It's up on Airbnb. 2 months blocked out. Her words hit me harder than the knock on the door had. 2 months. Not a week. Not a weekend emergency. This wasn't last-minute chaos. It was a plan. My mother and Clara had rented out the house, pocketed the cash, and decided I'd be the free alternative. Ivy's eyes searched mine. "You didn't know, did you?" I shook my head slowly, the betrayal sharp in my chest. And then another detail came rushing back, my father's voice on the phone. The way he hadn't sounded surprised, only tired. He had known. He had known and said nothing, letting me find out by being cornered. The silence between Ivy and me stretched, filled only by the hum of the fridge. I finally muttered. They wanted me to carry it, all of it. And he let them. Ivy touched my arm lightly. "Then don't." Her certainty startled me, but it felt like air after drowning. I closed the bag of pastries, appetite gone, but her words stayed. For the first time, I let myself believe I could refuse. That night, I checked my own locks twice before bed, already thinking of what else I needed to change. 2 days later, I sat in the leasing office of a brick building on the north end of Capitol Hill, signing my name across page after page. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but not with dread, more like certainty. I'd been living here for 6 months already, subletting from a coworker, but today the lease was mine alone. No one else's name, no cosigner, no shadow of permission hanging over me. The manager slid the final copy into a folder and handed it across the desk. "Welcome officially," she said. I nodded, tucking it under my arm like armor. That afternoon, I called a locksmith, watching him replace the deadbolt. I thought of Ivy's words, how simple she'd made it sound. Then, don't. Boundaries weren't selfish. I realized they were survival. Every lock clicked into place with a finality I had never dared claim before. For years, I had let my parents' needs leak into every corner of my life. Now, for the first time, I was sealing off my own. I boiled water for tea as the locksmith left, the quiet in my apartment steadying me. My phone buzzed on the counter, my father's name again. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. "Helen," he began, his voice low. "Tired. Your mother says this is going too far. Don't embarrass us. Just let them stay a little while. Embarrass us." The words landed like stones. It wasn't about me, my healing, or the truth of what they'd done. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Dad, they rented out Clara's house. They planned this. You knew." Silence. Then a sigh. "It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's simple. I can't be the solution anymore." He didn't argue, but his silence held the same weight it always had in absence that sided with her. I hung up before it could flatten me. The kettle whistled sharp and bright. I poured the water, letting the steam rise, filling the air with something clean. For the first time, I felt the door between us wasn't fragile. It was locked, and the key was mine. That night, I left the lease folder on the table, unopened but solid, a reminder of the life I was finally building without their permission. The next evening, my phone lit up again, and this time, when I answered, their voices came together. My father had put me on speaker. I could hear the scrape of a chair, the edge of my mother's breath, then her words spilling fast. "You're punishing the kids, Helen. They've done nothing wrong. Do you hear them crying? That's on you." Her tone was sharp, clipped to cut. I sat at my kitchen table, eyes fixed on the folder with my lease papers. My hand trembled, but not with fear. Anger steadied it. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said slowly. "I'm protecting myself. You should try it." There was a beat of silence, then the sound of my mother scoffing. "That's selfish. Family doesn't shut doors. Family helps." I leaned forward, pressing the phone against my ear. "Family also doesn't lie. You rented out Clara's house and pretended you were stranded. You dumped this on me and thought I'd fold. That isn't help. It's use." For once, my mother didn't have a quick reply. I heard her shifting the faint creak of floorboards. My father cleared his throat. "Helen, just calm down. It's gotten out of hand. We can fix this quietly." Quietly. The word wrapped around me like a net. That was always his answer. Smooth it over. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. His silence yesterday. His silence 5 years ago. His silence. Every time she cut me down. It all gathered in that one request. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking now, but clear. "Your silence is just another yes to her. If you won't defend me, then stop asking me to defend myself less." On the other end, nothing. Just a faint shuffle, the sound of someone covering the receiver. Then my father's breath, ragged, torn between us. I ended the call before he could choose. The apartment fell back into stillness. The only sound, the hum of the fridge. I set the phone down, pulse racing. But I knew there was no taking back what I had said. I reached for the folder and slid it open, ready to face what came next. Inside the folder lay more than my lease. I had tucked away envelopes after my grandmother's death, papers I hadn't opened in months because I hadn't wanted to stir the ache. That night, I laid them across the table one by one. The estate documents were neat, her handwriting still steady in the margins. For years, I'd believed my mother controlled everything, that she held the keys to tuition money to the old house on Bainbridge Island, to every decision that touched us. She had spoken with such certainty, and my father never corrected her. His silence became truth. But here it was in ink. The accounts my mother boasted about weren't in her name at all. The trust for Clara's children had been reassigned to my cousin Leora. The medical directive named Marta Cohen, a neighbor my grandmother trusted more than her own daughter. The deed to the Bainbridge property was still intact, but the clause beneath it was unmistakable. This property shall not be transferred to any heir who disregards the stated boundaries of the estate holder. I ran my finger along the line, my throat tightening. Boundaries written into law. My grandmother had seen what I only now admitted, that my mother's hunger would consume everything if left unchecked. She had written her defense in advance, quiet but final. I thought of my father then. All the times he'd said, "It's complicated." All the times he'd chosen not to interfere. He had let her story stand. Let me believe she had the authority. In truth, he'd given it away through inaction, the weight of his silence leaving her unchecked. I stacked the papers neatly again, but their meaning no longer felt hidden. My grandmother had already drawn the line for me. I only had to decide whether to keep standing on it. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room as I slid the folder shut, already knowing the next step would cut deeper than words. The calls stopped after that night. No more vibrating phone on the counter, no more texts asking what I was doing or ordering me to unlock the door. 3 days passed, each one quieter than the last, and for once I wasn't waiting for the next interruption. At first the silence felt unnatural, like the pause before a storm, but it didn't break. I woke each morning to the sound of gulls drifting in from Elliott Bay and the low hum of buses starting their routes down Broadway. The noise belonged to the city, not to my parents, and I let it settle around me. I made coffee the way I liked it strong. No sugar, no one wrinkling their nose at the bitterness. I ate when I was hungry, not when someone else expected a meal. Even the air inside my apartment felt lighter, no tension pressing against the walls. For the first time in years, I wasn't glancing over my shoulder for their approval. At night, I sat with the folder still on the table, unopened, but steady. Knowing it was there was enough. The words inside no longer threatened me. They anchored me. My grandmother had written a truth my parents could not erase, and I had chosen to step into it. By the third evening, I stopped checking my phone altogether. If their names flashed across the screen, it no longer mattered. Their silence wasn't punishment. It was space. And in that space, I could finally hear my own thoughts without them being drowned out. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the stillness of my apartment, aware that the next choice would be mine alone. The lease folder sat open on the table, and this time I didn't hesitate. I signed each page slowly, pressing the pen hard enough that the strokes left grooves in the paper. No father's cosign, no mother hovering over my shoulder, no conditions hidden in the margins. It was my name alone, written clean and steady. When the manager handed me the keys, the weight of the metal in my palm felt like a promise. I walked through the apartment again, every room echoing with possibility. The walls were bare, the windows stray, but the emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I hung a single photo on the wall, not of my parents, but of my grandmother standing in her garden, sunlight cutting across her face. She had known the cost of silence, and she had chosen to write boundaries into permanence. I was only following through. For years, I'd been told that family was obligation, that saying no was betrayal, that sacrifice proved love. But sitting in my own living room, lease papers stacked beside me, I saw it differently. Family should be chosen, not endured. Love shouldn't be currency traded for compliance. The rain began again outside, a soft patter against the glass. I curled into the armchair by the window, coffee cooling on the table, the keys still resting in my hand. The voices that once filled every corner of my life were gone, replaced by the steady quiet of my own making. I looked at the door, its new lock glinting faintly in the lamplight, and felt the truth settle. I warned them, and this time I kept my